Kia ora, good afternoon and welcome to Newshub Nation's live budget 2022 special. Expectations are sky high today. The government promised that post-COVID it would build back better. But can this budget fulfil that promise, or will it instead address the immediate cost of living crisis? All of this against a backdrop of the pandemic, the war in Ukraine and climate change. And we have the first information coming from the Treasury budget lockup now. He has spent the last 3.5 hours in the lockup, and here he is beaming in from the beehive with the numbers that we've all been waiting for. Our senior reporter, Connor Wetton. Connor, you've been poring over the documents. What is the big story today?
Well, Rebecca, the big story is the one that's affecting all New Zealanders at the moment. That is the raging monster that is record inflation. And the question is whether the government can do enough to help. Now, it was always going to be about health and climate in this budget, but really overshadowing that has been that cost of living pressure. And the big story out of today is what the government is doing. It is a free cash handout for more than 2 million New Zealanders in order to help with those rising bills. Now, it's going to be a $350 one-off payment. It'll be available from August 1st in 3 separate instalments, and that's going to go out to everyone under $70,000 in income who isn't already getting other forms of government support like the winter energy payment, which is designed to help top up people on low incomes. Now, the government says that means that 80% of working-aged Kiwis will be receiving some kind of extra support. It is a huge boost in this budget, but the question really is how far is that $350 going to go? 2 million Kiwis, though, going to find out from August this year.
And this is a surprise, isn't it, Connor? Because we know that the Finance Minister was under a lot of pressure to address the cost of living crisis, but they also had these strategic objectives to meet. So we got no sort of inkling that this was in the pipeline before today.
Yeah, and it's a really difficult balance to strike, Rebecca. You said that they had these big goals, these big targets like health and climate and, of course, building the economy back from COVID. But when the government's spending lots and lots of money, that also adds to the inflation pressure. That can help drive the cost of living up. So what they had to find was something a little bit more targeted. We've heard National talk about tax cuts for everyone. The government was insistent that could help make things worse by not having that sort of targeted level of spend. So this is a big surprise in this budget, and it's come alongside a few other measures for cost of living, which maybe we did expect this time around. They have extended those half-price public transport fares and the cheaper price of petrol, although that is only going to be for the next 2 months. So all in all, it's more than $1 billion on cost of living. The question is, though, how long is inflation going to stick around? And the forecast from Treasury is 6.7% this year, and it'll still be above 5%
Connor,
in 2023.
Thank you so much for joining us from Parliament. We have to go live now to the heart of Parliament, where Finance Minister Grant Robertson is on his feet. He is about to deliver his budget 2022. Let's take a look.
Congratulations. Don't spend it all at once.
Oh, we've got extras.
Hensa.
So the Finance Minister is just getting ready to give deliver his budget to Parliament. But the big news today is that more than 2 million Kiwis are being given $350 to help meet the cost of living from August this year. There will be cheaper fuel and half-price public transport also extended, available for another 2 months. And $11.4 billion will support the government's health reforms in the next 4 years, helping clear DHB debt and cover the rising cost of care.
Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill introduction.
The Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill is set down for first reading forthwith.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Grant Robertson.
I move that the Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill be now read a first time.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those in that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill, first reading.
The Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill is now set down for second reading forthwith.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Grant Robertson.
I move that the Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill be now read a second time. It is my great pleasure to present New Zealand's fourth wellbeing budget. In each of this government's three previous wellbeing budgets, we've not only considered the performance of our economy and finances, but also the wellbeing of our people, the health of our environment, and the strength of our communities. In Budget 2020 and 2021, we applied that wellbeing approach to dealing with COVID-19. This meant taking a health and science-led approach, focusing on caring for our people and our communities. It has meant that New Zealand has reached this stage of the pandemic in as good a position as any other country. Mr Speaker, that is not just because we have one of the lowest death rates from COVID, but also because our economy is in a stronger position than most. This has been recognised by 2 AAA credit ratings from leading ratings agencies and by the likes of the OECD and the IMF. It has been a tough couple of years for New Zealanders. I want to again thank businesses, workers and all members of our community for your hard work. It means we are now in a strong position to meet the next set of challenges and take the new opportunities to provide all New Zealanders with economic security in good times and in bad. The investments we are making in this budget build on the progress we made in Budget 2021 towards the government's 3 goals for this term. These are continuing to keep New Zealanders safe from COVID-19, accelerating the recovery and the rebuild from the impacts of COVID-19, and laying the foundations for the future, including addressing key issues such as climate change, housing affordability and child poverty. Budget 2022 invests $5.9 billion a year in net new operating spending, while introducing multi-year funding packages that also draw from Budget 2023 and Budget 2024 operating allowances. We're investing $2.9 billion from the Climate Emergency Response Fund to meet our emissions reduction plan and lay the foundations for a long-term transition to a low-emissions, high-wage economy. And, Mr Speaker, we are also supporting New Zealanders to meet the rising cost of living caused by global inflation pressures through a targeted package of support focusing on low and middle income New Zealanders, including a short-term cost of living payment for around 2.1 million people. Mr Speaker, New Zealand's overall well-being has held up well during the COVID pandemic. Our mortality rate remains lower than those of our international peers, and life satisfaction remains high across all ethnicities. While the economic contraction associated with COVID-19 was much deeper and much more sudden than what New Zealand experienced during the global financial crisis, the economy has proved to be resilient, with economic activity in the December 2021 quarter 3.5% ahead of pre-pandemic levels. Unemployment at 3.2% is at record lows. Household incomes have continued to rise and balance sheets are strong across almost every sector. We have done this with some of the lowest debt in the world. Our net debt is forecast to be around 1/2 of Australia's, 1/4 of the UK's and 1/5 of the USA's using a comparable measure. As I've indicated, we are moving to a new debt indicator that is more in line with how other countries measure their net debt and more accurately reflects the government's fiscal position. On that indicator, net debt will now peak at 19.9% of GDP, or 41% using the old indicator, before reducing further over the forecast period. Economic growth is forecast to peak at 4.2% and average 2.1% across the forecast period. We're forecast to reach an operating balance before gains or losses, the Obergale surplus, in the 2024-25 financial year. This will be 5 years after COVID hit us and is a year earlier than the previous government returned to surplus after the global financial crisis. New fiscal rules will oblige the government to run a small surplus on average over time once we have returned to surplus and maintain net debt at a ceiling of below 30% of GDP. This approach means that current expenses will be met from current revenue. We will have a prudent level of debt that allows for a buffer against future shocks while providing room for high quality and much needed investment to close our infrastructure deficit. Mr. Speaker, this balanced approach to fiscal policy is critical as we face the immediate challenges that are in front of us and as we address the long-term issues in our economy. The impacts of COVID-19 remain with us. Experiences of the pandemic differ greatly among New Zealanders, and its long-term effects have yet to be seen. Long-standing challenges around climate change, child poverty, productivity, and housing quality and affordability have not lost their urgency. On top of that, Budget 2022 has been delivered in a difficult time for the global economy and for many New Zealanders. The impacts of rising inflation due to COVID, supply chain challenges and pressure on oil prices from the Russian invasion of Ukraine are being felt at the petrol pump and at the supermarket. This budget responds to these immediate challenges facing New Zealanders while also looking ahead. The here and now matters, but so too does tomorrow, and making sure that we provide for a secure future. This budget is about both. A careful balance to provide economic security into the future and make sure we invest for what is needed now without adding to the drivers of inflation. Mr. Speaker, I'll talk more about our long-term initiatives shortly, but first I want to focus on our immediate challenges. I am acutely aware of the cost of living pressures that exist for many people, particularly those on low and middle incomes. While the current levels of inflation are expected to be temporary, this doesn't take away from the impact it is having on households and businesses. New Zealanders are not alone in feeling these pressures. Recently, the US has recorded inflation of 8.5%, Canada 6.7%, Germany 7.3%, and as of last night, the UK 9%. The very latest OECD average was an inflation of 8.8% in March, putting New Zealand about the middle of the pack. Such international comparisons, however, do not diminish the impact on New Zealanders who are currently struggling to deal with rising costs. Mr. Speaker, the government throughout COVID has supported households and businesses. More than $20 billion was provided in across-the-board support from the wage subsidy scheme, resurgent support and COVID support payments. This has kept many people in work. 62% of all jobs were supported in 2020 by the wage subsidy scheme and 47% in 2021. In response to the rapid spike in global oil prices following the war in Ukraine, we moved quickly in March to reduce the fuel excise by 25 cents a litre. For a family that fills up an average car every week, that represents up to $17 per tank or more than $220 worth of support over the 3 months. Road user charges were similarly reduced and public transport prices halved for the same period. These measures were on top of changes that we made to increase income support for low and middle income families from 1 April this year, including a third lift in weekly main benefit rates following those in 2020 and 2021. The changes that we have made since coming into government mean that 364,000 people who receive income support are better off by an average of $109 per week. For those with children, they are better off by an average of $175 per week. As we move through these next few months, further targeted support is being provided for low and middle income New Zealanders. The resumption of the winter energy payment from the 1st of May is providing this for superannuitants and those on income support, with at least $80 per month from the beginning of May until the end of September. But the increasing cost of living is affecting those on middle incomes as well. To provide targeted support to a wider group through this budget, the government is investing more than $1 billion in a cost of living package targeted at low and middle income households. The package includes an extension to the reduction of fuel excise duty introduced in March by 2 months until mid-August, an extension of the road user charges cuts introduced in April until mid-September, and an extension of half-price public transport fares introduced on 1 April until the end of August. I can also announce today that from September we will introduce Community Connect to extend half-price public transport to the more than 1 million community services card holders on a permanent basis. Mr. Speaker, in addition to helping reduce costs for households, the public transport price cuts will also further our climate change and emission reduction objectives. We will also provide short-term targeted support to low and middle-income New Zealanders through a $350 cost of living payment across 3 monthly instalments from August 1. This works out to about $27 per week for an estimated 2.1 million New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker, this payment will be available.
The Finance Minister there headlining his delivery of the budget 2022 to Parliament with this cost of living package. He's been under political pressure and from Kiwis as well to address the cost of living crisis. It is a surprise today, but we have heard him headline there the government's response. Alongside me here today to delve into and dissect all of the detail of this budget is our political panel. That includes senior journalist Dita Deboni from the National Business Review, senior economist from Sense Partners Shamabil Yaqub, welcome, and Dr. Ella Henry from AUT. Welcome everybody. I thought we would take a look at the budget at a glance up here. These are the sort of headline numbers, if you like, and then sort of dive into some of that detail. We have $1.25 billion in a cost of living support package. We've just heard from the Minister on that. $11.1 billion over 4 years for those health reforms. That was widely foreshadowed today. $191 million boost to Farmac and $1 billion for Maori. Shamabil, what is the big number out for you today?
None of those ones, actually.
Infrastructure,
Infrastructure. So the capital expenditure by government is going to be about 50% higher for the next 3 years, which is extraordinary. We normally spend about 10 billion a year. This is going to be more like 15. Much needed, because New Zealand has a huge infrastructure deficit. I'm really, really glad to see we're going to be pouring more money into it because there is just no alternative.
And so what kinds of infrastructure are we talking about, Shamabil?
So quite a lot of it is going into health, but I think, when you look at the capital expenditure program, it is across many of the votes. And that's because we've invested in our infrastructure almost every part of New Zealand for so long. Fantastic.
Dita?
The Productivity Commission said that we have a $200 billion deficit in infrastructure spend. So put in that context, it's really not that much at all. But yeah, it's better than usual. I think the cost of living allowances are a clever political move. The government is worried about losing the next election because the middle class is being promised tax cuts. So they're doing it their own way by giving a bit of spending to people. I don't think it's anywhere near enough. And to me, for example, cheaper fuel. Why would you be encouraging people to get into their cars at this time? This is the wrong thing, I think. I would increase the payments to beneficiaries. I mean, $350, a $350 payment is half someone's grocery bill for 1 week. Yeah, it's not enough. I don't think there's enough social spending here. It's all about food, housing and getting around. And I mean, $6 million to increase supermarket competition, let's see what that is, because the cost of food is a big problem.
Yeah, well, it's hip pocket politics, but, will it be enough is a big question. Ella, what is exciting you or disappointing you in the budget today?
Well, I'm heartened by the broad range of additional support for Maori across health, particularly education, employment and especially for our iwi working in rural areas, being able to cope with the effects of climate change. That's a really big ticket item. I'm also heartened by the contribution to cheaper dental treatment. I come from the far north, where poor families up there often have to make a choice between fixing a tooth and buying food. Yes. And that's where actually they do need petrol because there is no public transport. Right. You can't use bicycles on the road in those isolated communities. So anything that helps them to keep their families safe and healthy is, I think, a positive outcome.
Wonderful. Well, so what do the Greens make of this budget? Co-leader Marama Davidson is with us now. Marama, welcome. A bit of a surprise today in the budget for us. Anyway, are you heartened by the cost of living package? Does it go far enough for you?
Well, can I just first be really clear? We support this being a climate budget. $2.9 billion is an important and critical statement to make for a budget that does focus on climate.
Yes.
And what we also know, and this is what happens when you have Green ministers and Green MPs in government being able to push for the work that would have happened only with Greens and not with Labour on its own. So we also know, though, and I heard you, Dita, that we need to do far more in addressing inequality, and particularly for those who earn the least, for those households who are absolutely struggling the most. We've been quite clear. We should have seen a lift to the lowest income rates, to benefit rates, to the welfare expert work that has already been done to lay out a plan. That's what else the Greens would like to see. And actually the link is we cannot address climate fully without also making sure we're bringing everyone with us and with addressing poverty and inequality particularly.
Absolutely. Marama, does the $350 payment plus the fuel tax and the work around public transport, keeping that at a lower cost for another 2 months, does it satisfy you, or is it just the beginning as far as you're concerned?
Just the beginning, and of course we would like to see more efforts put towards public transport, cycling and walking, as opposed to encouraging more use of petrol cars. However, we understand also that we need to come up with a plan for rural transport, for getting around in rural areas. But what we should be seeing is further and free, actually, public transport, as well as we also do welcome the more warmer homes being cheaper for people to actually stay warm in the winter. We do absolutely welcome that, both for the pocket but for the planet and the climate as well. There are green sort of initiatives and values that if we have more Green MPs in government, we would like to see. For example, rent controls. We know that that is hitting a lot of people in their bills at the moment, and the Greens have been very vocal about wanting to see a stop to the increase in one of the biggest housing costs that people have.
Yes, we know that does disproportionately affect people on lower incomes. Marama, just finally, we haven't spoken too much about this yet, but health is also a big winner today.
Yeah. Look, we campaigned hard as the Green Party for a Maori health authority. What we want to see, and we welcome the funding today, brilliant. What we want to see is ensuring that that funding gets out to the Maori and Pasifika health providers is what we would like to see. We saw through COVID how much leadership we all depended on for those providers to be able to lead that work. We also want to make sure we're taking into account Maori in rural areas through that Maori Health Authority. So properly resourced and properly empowered.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us, Marama Davidson from Parliament this afternoon. Well, I want to take a look at what we thought was going to be the very big headline today, which is the health numbers. I think we do have a graphic which we'll be able to bring up, which will give us the headline numbers for health today. We have got... Oh, they're coming. I'm told that they are coming. Well, I have... Oh, here it is. OK, so there is $11.1 billion over 4 years for health reforms. This is widely foreshadowed by the government. $191 million to Pharmac, $126 million on cheaper dental treatment, and $1.3 billion in health infrastructure. So this is what the government's sort of ideological legacy building project, isn't it? The health overhaul. Ella, what do you think of what we've seen announced today?
Well, like you, I think that health... all of us actually, infrastructure, you know, we have hospitals all around the country that are in dire needs of work. We have health practitioners who are not earning what they could overseas, and we're going to see a terrible brain drain there if we don't have the resources to hold them here and to keep them in safe, warm buildings. So I really applaud. It's a small amount, but let's see where it goes in terms of health infrastructure improvements.
And the dental package there that was widely foreshadowed too, $126 million on cheaper dental treatment. Shamabeel, is that going to make a big difference?
I've got a wry smile because it doesn't go very far when you're spending on dentists, does it? Look, I think the more important part in this budget is not about the dollars they've spent, because they have spent it very thin, but I think it's the direction. There is a lot more targeting. So with the exception of the fuel tax, which is cheap fuel for everybody, which I think is a bad policy, the fact that the lower PT fares are for community card holders, the fact that they're trying to target some of the $350 spending on low-income earners that are not getting the winter energy payments, these are additional and targeted areas of spending. Something that our governments haven't done a lot of. So I think this is a good signal that, yes, we understand there is pain, but this money is not going to be spent on everyone. It is going to be for those who need it. And this would have come with very strong backing from the Treasury, because they don't want lots of money being spent by government that increases spending and increases inflation. So I think what we're seeing is this marrying of the economic kind of pressures as well as the more political pressures to make sure that it's targeted towards those who are doing it tough. But totally agree, Dita, the increase in living costs is so much more than $350 a year that it is barely going to touch the sides.
Yes, and it is a tightrope that the Finance Minister has been walking, isn't it? But FI Akine coming up, all the political leaders live with their first impressions too of Budget 22 and what it all means for you. That is after the break. Hoki Maiano, and welcome back to this Newshub Nation Budget 2022 special. Well, he's already outlined his alternative budget, which would include a big slash in burns. So what does he think of Grant Robertson's? ACT Party leader David Seymour joins me now from Parliament. David, what is your headline for Budget 2022? I know you'll have one. Good to go.
Look, Grant Robertson had one shot, one opportunity to stop this being the brain drain budget. Unfortunately, he has not taken the initiative. His big ideas are put half the country on welfare for 3 months at the end of the year, give you a bit more discount on your train fares, and then what? Unfortunately, people who rely on something called working for a living are no better off. Their taxes keep going up. And the really sad thing is that the attraction of a place called Australia just got a whole lot stronger with that failure to give hope that we have a real strategy for ending the cost of living crisis, for raising incomes. And the sad thing is, when I said it would be a brain drain budget, I never imagined that the Treasury documents that have been released actually show the population is going to be lower than they thought it would be in December. So even the Treasury is now forecasting people are going to leave. It is a sad and sorry day. Grant Robertson had that opportunity. He didn't take it, and I fear that more New Zealanders will take opportunities offshore, and this budget will be remembered as the brain drain budget.
Well, what he has done, though, David, is he has addressed the big political elephant in the room, which is cost of living, and that's smart politics, isn't it?
Well, it's smart rhetoric, but when you say he's addressed it, I take issue with that. If you earn over $70,000, all you get is additional tax to pay for all this expenditure that's going on. If you look at the deteriorating situation, the amount of debt that we will have has now gone up by $15 billion at the peak. We're now going from an $800 million deficit next year to a $6.6 billion deficit next year. And for people who thought there was an end to the cost of living crisis, Treasury in December forecast we'd have 3% inflation next year. It's now forecasting 5.3% inflation next year. So that cost of living crisis is going to roll into next year. What we really needed to do was reel in government spending, reel in taxation, let people keep more of their own money. For example, in our alternative budget,
if you were
someone on
Finance Minister,
70
David,
grand keeps another $2,300.
What is one thing that you would do if you were Finance Minister, David, today that would help the great majority of New Zealanders with the cost of living crisis? One thing, briefly.
It's very simple. We would pull back expenditure by $6.8 billion. If that sounds like a lot, Labor have increased spending by $45 billion in 5 years. The more government spends, the more inflation we have, and the more inflation we have, the more the Reserve Bank's going to put up your mortgage rate. And don't think you'll get away with that because you're renting. Of course, it's going to be passed on by landlords as well. This spending habit, this insatiable appetite that Grant Robertson has, is a disaster for New Zealand. It makes me so mad, actually, that he hasn't been able to get over his ideological opposition to just letting hardworking people keep more of their own money by reducing taxes.
OK, David, well, thank you so much for joining us. We will talk more about some of the points that you raised there on debt with our panel shortly. But first, we are going to National Party Finance spokesperson Nicola Willis. She joins us now live. Nicola, what did the government get right today?
Well, Labor's backwards budget is bad news for New Zealanders and their families.
That's a lot of bees.
It forecasts the cost of living crisis continuing for at least another 2 years, and it completely ignores, yet again, the squeezed middle of New Zealanders who are set to get nothing out of this budget. Anyone earning a wage of $70,000 or more, and bear in mind $72,000 is the average wage, will get nothing, and we say that they are being failed by this government. What's more, Grant Robertson has had a complete budget blowout. Not only has he spent a record amount of New Zealanders' money in this budget, he's also raided next year's budget kitty, taking $2 billion from that, and the year after that, taking $0.5 billion from that. So all up, he's spending $8.4 billion in this budget, and that's before you even count the climate change spending, the COVID spending, and the additional money he's putting on top of that. So we say he's addicted to spending. It's time for him to give New Zealanders some of their own money back.
Well, he's doubled down, even in the face of criticism from your party that he's addicted to spending. So if you were Finance Minister, would you scrap the billions that Labor is spending on health, for example? And I don't want to hear that you'll go through the policy line by line. I want a real answer.
Well, we would want to see outcomes for that expenditure, and what's really noticeable in this budget is that the money is allocated to what is often described as cost pressures. There's no spelling out of what are the additional services, what are the additional operations, what are the additional things that New Zealanders will get out of their health system as a consequence. And we're really concerned that a lot of this money is going to get churned up in a big restructure with money wasted on the back office, on bureaucracy, on red tape, and we want to see that money going into health outcomes.
OK, so you would keep the spending, I'm taking from that answer. Tax cuts...
There is just no way. There is just no way we would have to be spending as much as Grant Robertson is in this budget.
Okay.
He's had a complete blowout. He's allocated more than $8 billion, and we think he's not showing the discipline that a national government would.
So what are you going to not fund then? What would New Zealanders miss out on?
Well, in this budget, we can see straight away $650 million allocated for ribbon cutting at private companies as part of the Climate Change Fund. We wouldn't do that. We can also see that there's money allocated to continue growing the size of the public service, with tens of millions allocated for the writing of new strategies and plans. We wouldn't do that. We'd ask the existing public servants to do more with less. We can also see in this budget a continuation of policies such as Kiwi Build, which have not delivered in the past and which we very much doubt will deliver in the future.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Nicola Willis from Parliament this afternoon. Back to our panel now, who I could see shaking their heads. Shamabeel Dita, I'm going to come to you first, Shamabeel. A lot of shaking of your head during David Seymour's interview.
Oh, it just made me angry. It's just so economically illiterate, right? It's like, it's not government spending that is driving inflation. We literally had the UK print 9% inflation yesterday because there is a global inflation crisis. Now, yes, we should talk about inflation. Yes, we should talk about government, but you can't just tell lies about what's going on in the economy. So, you know, this whole thing that apparently it's wasteful government spending that's creating inflation is simply not true. You can say that there's parts of this spending that we don't like, and we won't do that because that doesn't add value, is not efficient, is not consistent with ideology. That's all fine. But let's not do it on the basis of, I think, what are completely wrong things to say.
Dita?
Of the many things that irritated me about those conversations was the idea that bureaucrats don't do enough, which is something we hear over and over again. Where they're going to do more for less. Well, you know, would David Seymour do more for less money? I'm not sure about that. I mean, if anything, we need to spend more money on our health system, keeping our nurses here. Our nurses are our number one, and doctors, but nurses particularly, they're underpaid. They are our number one resource in the health system. So I would like to see more money spent. And if that means, I mean, I make over 70 grand, I'm happy to have nothing from the budget. I would rather our nurses are paid properly. And
I want to go to the cost of living, the big story today, if you're just joining us. The big story is the cost of living package. I will just get these numbers out there again. They are $814 million cost of living package. Yeah, that's for the cost of living payment of $350. That is a one-off payment. $235 million, that is a 2-month extension to cheaper fuel. $132 million, that's half-price public transport extended. And $6 million into more supermarket competition. Now, I know that this is a pain point for many households. Going to the supermarket has become an ordeal for many families, Ella. This $6 million to help supermarket competition. You're shaking your head again, Shamabeel. I'm going to come to you. But what do you think, Ella?
Well, first and foremost, I do think that $350 for families who are really doing it hard is not a lot of money, but it is actually big. If you're, and I know families in the north who, you know, have got $60 or $70 a week to buy groceries, an extra $5 is a lot.
Makes a big difference.
It's an extra bottle of milk. It's extra fruit. So that is something that is a stopgap measure. I do wonder where $6 million for supermarket competition can go. It won't even build one supermarket. So it's... I'm not. Yeah, I mean, I don't. What is it for? Tell me what it is for.
Well, yes. What do you think, Shamabeel? Because this is a little bit of a mystery. I'm pulling it up now.
It's to help other supermarkets buy land, because at the moment there's a whole bunch of covenants and things that stop supermarkets from competing next to another supermarket. So this money is really to kind of clear up some of that stuff, which was kind of part of the recommendations from the Commerce Commission's fairly wet lettuce set of recommendations of the supermarket
You wouldn't have to spend that money, though, if the market worked properly. I mean, the point is to clamp down and restructure that market, I think.
Totally.
And this is just a stopgap measure, a Band-Aid, saying, yeah, someone else come and build your supermarket.
This was the big sort of political danger for the Finance Minister today, wasn't it? Going into this budget, he was under a lot of pressure to deliver on cost of living for families. All of New Zealand households are focused on their finances, and it is surprising that they have come up with this. Do you think they've come up with it at the last moment, that this is something that they've been considering just in the last month or so? It has a bit of that feel about it. It's a bit of a cobbled together of different measures.
They've been pressured very hard on the supermarket front. There's no question. Everyone, as Shamabel said, thought that report was weak source. The government hasn't really seemed to go, yeah, we're going to do much worse than that, so, blow that aside. So they're spending this money here as a kind of a sop to people to say, yes, competition's coming and your prices will come down. That's not really going to help people for whom $5 extra a week is a big deal. It's not going to help them.
Do you think this is smart politics, Shamabel?
Look, I think it was important because the cost of living is so real for many people. Having some recognition and some way to kind of give money to them, I think, is helpful. I think we saw the same kind of political calculus with the fuel tax. I think we've seen the same political calculus with the public transport subsidy being extended. But we should put this in context, though. So the cost of living stuff is about $1 billion. In the 2022 year, the government will be spending $155 billion.
Yes.
So, a lot of what we're talking about today is the stuff at the margin. We're not talking about the hundreds of billions of dollars that we spend on everything, every day, that is not part of the scrutiny that we're applying today.
Yes, but I suppose it is hip pocket politics, isn't it? It's the stuff that mum and dad are worried about at home.
Well, I think it's a signal, because this is the meat of the sandwich budget, right? This is the middle of the political cycle. You don't want to spend all your political capital and all your good ideas before the election year coming up next year. So that's the budget, that's your real centerpiece for all the big things you want to dangle in front of people to win the next election. So this one, I think, really had to go. There's a whole bunch of things we really want to do, like the health reforms. Make sure that's funded and it is put in place with multi-year programs. So whoever comes into power next can't undo it. And then make sure there's enough room to be able to do some of these other things to reduce some of the political pressures, because we've all seen the polls.
Yeah, and Grant Robertson's clearly seen the polls. Here we go. I wanted to talk about the support package for Māori, because this is significant too, isn't it, Ella, in terms of reducing inequalities. $1 billion over 4 years for Māori. That is $260 million for Māori health as well. $200 million for Māori education and $155 million for Māori employment.
And I'd like to think that a chunk of that is going in, because I know, because I work in the education sector, how transformative education is. It doesn't just change the individual's life, it's for the whānau. So we've got to create more opportunities and scholarships to get Māori into not just tertiary but trades. And so the Māori employment funding, I hope, is going to boost the numbers of trade training for Māori. We know from the 1970s and 80s what a profound difference Māori trade training made to Māori families. So we've got to be able to, support apprenticeships, scholarships, those kinds of things. The critical issue around Māori health, though, is ensuring that there is a Māori voice at the table, because we've learned that when Māori do have a say over our health, that there are better outcomes for Māori and therefore for New Zealand. So I want to see the Māori health funding, the Health Authority, really given the capacity.
Well, a note here from our reporter inside the lockup said Māori health providers may be disappointed. Only $260 million is for Māori health, and the new Māori Health Authority will only be able to spend about $40 million a year.
I mean, I'm sure that's I'd like to think that's purely administration. You can't deliver a service on that.
Yes.
But the reality is simply being at the table so that we don't have to litigate against the government to get information to help our people.
Yes.
Which happened last year. Let's not have that again.
Yeah. And Dita, you are the eyes and ears of the business community here for us at this table. How do you think it will be being received by your readers over there at the NBR?
I don't think the readers of the NBR will like it too much, to be honest with you. It's got a redistributive flavour to it, which they do not like, and I think they'd like to see some relief for small business over and above what's already been spent on wage subsidies and COVID resurgence payments and so forth. And I do think small business is often left out of the equation, especially with Labor budgets. Which is a shame, because they are an integral part of the picture and probably deserve as much attention as many of the other constituencies that are listed here, I would say.
It's also quite an ideological budget in some respects too, with that big health spend, with climate change that we've already had out. These are sort of big, ideas of Labor's, and they are legacy projects.
I suppose, although the way I see it is we're just spending money to catch up to where we should be, really.
In infrastructure.
Yeah.
Now, with so many pre-budget announcements this year, we're not even talking about climate today, are we? Because that information has been out there for a few days. But that is another significant element of the budget 2022, isn't it? Climate.
Oh, yes, absolutely, but not enough. And again, we've talked about the cheaper fuel. I mean, and notwithstanding the fact it's important in regional places for people to have cheaper fuel, they should have better public transport options, and that really is where you need to put a lot of that infrastructure spending, I think. They're going some ways towards that, but not enough. For example, why does anyone with a community service card have to pay for public transport? I mean, that just seems bonkers to me. I can't, you know, it's not expensive. It's actually not expensive for the services that we have at the moment. We need to be really driving people towards it.
Especially if that's, you know, that's where we're heading by 2025. Ella, any disappointments for you?
I guess the bigger disappointments are really around, you know, seeing where is the strategy around some of the key infrastructure issues like housing. We're still, I think, far too beholden on the international market. We don't have enough control over our own capacity, building houses, buying products from overseas, growing trees and then sending them away so that we can pay 3 times more than Australia for particle board. I mean, I'm still trying to get my head around that. You know, so there's infrastructure issues that I guess I would have liked to have seen more strategy, but I have to give, you know, praise where praise is due, and some of these things are going to make a difference to the most vulnerable whānau in this country, and for that, I think they deserve praise where praise is due.
Can I just unusually disagree with you just a little bit there? The budget is not a place where you put out strategies and things like this. So this budget is where they're kind of allocating spending to stuff that they have already decided or they want to look into. So this is not the place where we would see that. And I think that was part of the kind of criticism we heard from both ACT and National was, oh, you know, they should have done something on immigration. Well, they actually came out with an immigration policy that was fairly anti-immigration. So why would the budget have something that's about attracting immigrants? And same with Nicola, you know, she talked about how there'd be more discipline, but you know, that discipline led to the rotting hospitals that we have. So discipline has to be focused and actually has to be good.
Yes.
So I don't know, to me it feels like the budget is a document that gets held up for a lot of things. It can't do so much heavy lifting. A lot of the actual strategic work and all those other things are much more political, much more leadership related, and we shouldn't be looking for that today.
However, this is a point where we get to at least tell them what we think about it.
And we know that they're listening. We know they're listening. Grant Robertson's already acknowledged that in his with his package. Let's go back to senior reporter Connor Whitten for his analysis of Budget 2022. Connor, what was the biggest surprise for you in the lockup today? You've been with this material much longer than we have.
Yeah, well, if we put aside that huge surprise on that cost of living payment, I think it's the devil in the detail of some of these health reforms. So more than $11 billion over the next 4 years. It is a huge sum of money, but I think we should just delve a little bit into where that goes. A lot of that money is just really keeping up with cost pressures and paying off a lot of the debt that the DHBs have racked up. And a lot of the time we want to talk about winners and losers in this budget, and there's a more than $1 billion package in there for Māori. That looks like a win, but if you dig a little deeper below the surface, there's going to be some people pretty upset by that. Now let's talk about Māori health specifically. One of the reasons for this Māori Health Authority is that Māori inequities in health are the worst in the country. And if you look into that funding, we've got $1 billion to Māori, but only $160 million over the next 4 years is going to be for those Māori services. That means that the Māori Health Authority is only going to have a budget of $40 million a year to pay for those kaupapa Māori services. That is such a drop in the bucket of health spending that you really have to wonder how far it's going to go. So that $1 billion figure sounds like a lot of money, but really, how far is it going to go for Māori?
Thank you so much, Connor Whitten, for joining us from Parliament and for your work in the lockup today. Up next, Finance Minister Grant Robertson joins us live. Stay with us. Oh, welcome back. Well, he's just hot-footed it out of the House to join us after delivering his fifth budget. Finance Minister Grant Robertson joins us now live. Minister, what kept you awake at night in this budget?
Oh, well, this is a budget that we're putting together when the global economy is under extreme pressure. Everyone knows that because it's affecting us at home with the cost of living pressures that are happening. And what I wanted to make sure was that I struck a balance between helping New Zealanders out to get through this tough period now, but also making sure we don't forget about the really important issues for the future, like climate change and like health. So I think we struck the balance pretty well, but it's been a difficult time in which to put the budget together.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a surprise to the rest of us, Grant, which is not always the case with these budgets, that there was a cost of living package in there. You felt that pressure from Kiwis and you have responded. Is it enough?
Look, what it is a significant contribution to a range of households, and we've got 81% of working-age New Zealanders who are going to be receiving some support from the government through these next few months, through the winter energy payment and this new cost of living payment. Of course, it's not enough to meet every single pressure that people have got, but it is us saying to a group of low and middle income New Zealanders, we're in an inflation spike, we know you're feeling it, and here's a contribution from the government to support you.
And what's your feeling about that spike? Are we hitting the top at the moment and we should come back down the other side? Is that the sort of political calculation that you're making, that this will hit at a sweet spot and get us through?
Well, certainly the forecasts continue to say that inflation will come off its peak in the second half of 2022, but the world obviously is a volatile place. So we made this payment on the basis of the economic forecast, the fact that we know that New Zealanders are facing those cost of living pressures. We're also making those half-price public transport fares permanent for those on Community Services Card, about 1 million New Zealanders there. Plus we're extending out that and the fuel excise duty for everybody for a couple more months as well. So it is a package worth about $1 billion, and it's a significant step that we can take to support people. But the global economy is definitely under pressure, and economists are really struggling to agree on what's going to happen next. We're making sure we keep a careful eye on the books to help New Zealanders through that.
Well, our economist here on the panel is wondering about the infrastructure spend. Grant, how much of that is locked in?
So we've got $60 billion of infrastructure that will be spent over the next 5 years. So that ranges through from building more hospitals, the transport networks, road, rail, education facilities. But like everybody else who's building something, we're also subject to those increasing costs. And so therefore we have to take that into account. We're also, because of some of the labour supply constraints we've seen, some of our projects have had to be phased a little bit more. But that's a significant contribution to getting on top of that infrastructure deficit that we've got.
Just a final question for you. Will we see tax cuts from the Labour Party next year? Will you rule that in or rule that out? I know we just got your budget 2022. I'm already looking forward. That is the pleasure of a journalist.
I've just finished budget 2022.
Well, that's
I've just finished budget 2022. At least give me a day before you ask me that.
You can get started here on 2023. Tax cuts, yes or no? Rule them in or out?
Well, we're not even close to budget 2023. What we've done here is put across a carefully balanced budget for this year, and no doubt I'll be talking to you next year about budget 23.
I can hardly wait, Grant. Thank you so much for joining us here on The Nation this afternoon. Well, let's cross live to Parliament now, where National Leader Christopher Luxon is giving his response to Grant Robertson's budget 2022.
Why don't we review all the existing and new spending? It's obvious that hasn't happened. That hasn't happened with this budget. We have an unprecedented amount of money being spent here. And 5, prioritise tax relief, as I just said, for those workers. It wasn't ideological. It was sensible, practical, common sense, just to say, take the tax thresholds, index them to inflation and give people a break. And what I want to say is anyone earning over $50,000 would be better off under National's proposed inflation-adjusted tax brackets compared to Labour's cost of living package. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me lay out the facts on why the books are going backwards, because it is very, very important that Kiwis register what has gone on here today because of the economic mismanagement and the lack of economic leadership from this government. Kiwis up and down this country are tightening their belts at their kitchen tables. They are doing it, but Grant Robertson should be doing exactly the same, but he's not. And what we have seen from this government is a loss of a culture of financial discipline. We've seen a loss of targets. They don't care about every single dollar being spent as if it's their own, and they should, because it's not their money, it's taxpayers' money. But I'm telling you, Mr. Speaker, Grant Robertson has a problem, and his problem is that he is so deeply and utterly addicted to spending. And I want to say that the impact of his addiction on our fiscal books is incredibly clear, and when you think about it, he's damaging New Zealand's economy very strongly. This is, be under no doubt, this is a massive budget blowout. This government has, and I want just step it through, this government has increased government spending since coming to power by 67%. You haven't seen a 67% improvement in outcomes or services. And consequently, we're spending $127 billion this year in government spending. That is unprecedented. And that is $51 billion more this year than it was in 2017. $51 billion more. And now let's just look at this year, because Grant Robertson said he would spend $6 billion in the biggest budget spend-up in the history of New Zealand. And he's actually spending far, far more than that. And I want to take the House and the country through this, because it's actually really important everybody understands what's going on. Because he's trying to make out that he's fiscally prudent. And the reality is he's more addicted to spending than he's ever been before. There's the $6 billion he's already announced. And then you have to remember, earlier in the week, he spent $3 billion from the Climate Emergency Response Fund. Earlier in the week, a lot on Labor projects and buzzwords and strategies and plans for plans. But not to be done there, he's gone off and spent another $2 billion of new spending from the budget next year. And then on top of that, he's added another $400 million from the budget after that. That's called Budget 2024. And he's so desperate to spend up that he's actually robbed $2.5 billion from the next 2 years of budgets. But, Mr. Speaker, it's even worse than that, because the cost of living payment is actually outside that new allowance. There is a massive budget blowout, and when everyone thinks seriously about 2023, he's going to be spending a lot more next year. You just know it. And like someone who's addicted to spending, he can say all he likes about the future, but we just don't trust him. Because when you're addicted to spending, you can't let it go, and we know he'll continue to do it in the coming years.
A very impassioned speech there from Christopher Luxon in the House responding to Grant Robertson's budget. But joining us now is Māori Party co-leader Rawiri Waititi. You would be happy with that cost of living package today announced by the government, Rawiri?
Well, in actual fact, we pushed in terms of the cost of living to take GST off kai. We didn't see that. Yes. We haven't seen the transfer of tax to the wealthy in terms of capital gains and empty house tax. We're 190,000 empty houses across Aotearoa that should be there for the greater good of our people. That would have dealt with housing crisis, that would have dealt with the housing speculation, but also allowed our people to put kai on the table, which they, and those are the types of hard decisions we were expecting to see in this particular budget. So we can see that it's, overall to Māori, it's 0.6% of the total budget going to Māori kaupapa. It's still not good enough. 0.7% of the health budget going into the Māori Health Authority. Again, it's taken us a long time, 182 years to get to 0.7%. It's going to take 1,840 years to get to some kind of parity.
Well, you said that if the money didn't hit the ground in a meaningful way for Māori, that would be unacceptable to you. And what I'm hearing is that that $350 payment in the health funding is deeply disappointing to the Māori Party today.
No, those are some, there are some positive things out of this, and so we thought it would have gone further, but it hasn't, and so those things should be done because it's the right thing to do. But other things that should have happened was taking the tax off GST, taking GST off kai would have made a huge difference for our whānau out there. Extending fuel prices over another two-month period, those are not going to make a big difference. Those are just small little reliefs for our whānau. We need big, we need some big decisions by this government to allow our whānau to put kai on the table, to put a roof over their heads. Yeah. And unfortunately, this budget doesn't show any of that.
Rawiri, thank you so much for joining us from Parliament. The final words from our political panel now, Dita Deboni, Ella Henry and Shamabil Yaqub. What did you think of, first of all, of Grant Robertson's interview, what he had to say there? He has just buckled, hasn't he, to the populist politics of hip pocket politics?
It's that impossible balance to do everything that you want and make everybody happy at the same time. So the finance minister's job is impossible. But I think one thing he has done is he's not buckled under the pressure to say fiscal austerity is what we're going to do when there is so much need and investment required in our country.
Shamabil, I asked you, can you name the budget this year?
Anti-austerity.
Anti-austerity, OK. Dita, I'm going to come to you next. We saw Christopher Luxon going up against Grant Robertson for the first time, actually, for him as leader of the National Party. A lot of buzzwords.
Rebecca, I think we've found the new National Party buzzword phrase of the week, if not leading into the election, addicted to spending. Short, it's snappy, it's also Labor's backwards budget, according to them. So, yeah, a few lines.
Ella, I'm going to come to you next. I'm going to ask you to name this budget.
OK, well, we're going to have our first new public holiday next month, so I would call this the Matariki budget. It's a new year, but also Matariki is a verb which means to be quite small.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon on the panel. It's been a frenetic hour, but we've got through a lot of analysis. There is much more to go. I don't know whether all the time has gone. That is all from us for now. Orini Kaipara will be here with a post-budget 4:30 bulletin, and there will also be a full wrap from our political team with everything you need to know at 6 o'clock. And we'll be back in our usual time slot of 9:30 on Saturday morning with even more. Thank you for joining us. Ka kite.
This show was brought to you by the New Zealand On Air Public Interest Journalism Fund.